Travel, expenses, just adds up. Can't live.
Now I'm worried about their school.
Negotiations on Brexit that really safeguard the economy.
Housing, yeah, is a major issue. I still live at home with my parents. Not enough funding for the NHS.
Good evening. Here we are with a panel of leading London politicians and an audience, as you can hear, very enthusiastic, really champing at the bit. Let's go to our first question from Kazim Azid.
Hi there. Unfortunately, over the last few weeks and months, we've seen some truly disgusting attacks occurring both in London and also in Manchester, which is where I'm originally from. This has unfortunately left myself feeling very scared, and I'm sure many other individuals in the audience scared about the prospect of further attacks taking place. Therefore, I'd like to ask today, what policies will the parties here today be introducing to prevent against any further attacks, both in London, but also across the UK?
Kazim, thank you. And Diane Abbott, we'll start with you. What do you do?
I think, as you said, the most important thing is to keep people safe. And one of the policies that's in our manifesto is to recruit 10,000 more police officers. And we're doing that because actually under Theresa May's watch, we have lost 20,000 police officers. And although you might say, what have police officers got to do with fighting terrorism? I think community policing is a way of getting that information that can help us.
How many for London, by the way, of the 10,000?
I'm not sure how many for London. That'll be a matter. The amount people have in their police area will be a matter for the Chief Constable and the PCC.
But would London get half of them, say?
It's a matter for the Chief Constable.
He decides, really?
I just want to go forward and talk about the government's anti-terrorism strategies. And I want to talk about prevent.
Well, no, hang on. Can we stick on police numbers just while we get some other answers, Diane, before we go back? Prevent is important, of course. Gavin Barwell, they're going to buy more police officers than you are, aren't they?
Well, we're very clear that we're going to protect the police budget, and actually numbers in London have not gone down. We're putting extra officers into MI5 and MI6 and GCHQ.
Gone down since 2010.
No, the numbers are going to go up there by nearly 2,000 extra officers. You know, and there's a clear choice here at this election. Jeremy Corbyn, as leader of the Labour Party, has voted against every single piece of anti-terrorism legislation, not just under this government, but under previous Labour governments. Diane herself actually has previously suggested that we should abolish MI5. So on security of this election, there is a very clear choice between
Go on, Diane.
and Jeremy Corbyn.
I'm not sure whether Gavin was in Parliament at the time, but much of that anti-terrorism legislation, which Jeremy and I voted against, was also voted against by the Conservative Party. Theresa May voted against the 2005 Prevention of Terrorism Act. She voted against ID cards, and she voted against control orders without proper court supervision. And the point is this. It's easy to list legislation that people voted on, but that legislation that myself and a lot of the Tory party voted against, we felt was counterproductive, learning the lesson from Northern Ireland.
All right, quickly, Gavin.
Legislation has Jeremy voted for?
We voted for, because there was an attempt to have 90-day detention without trial, we voted against that. Right. 42 days detention without trial, we voted against that. But we voted for 28-day detention because we thought that was reasonable.
Let's just go back, remember Kazim's question, and Vince Cable, how do we stop what happened in Manchester happening again?
Well, you need very strong security services. They have been effective in the past. Large numbers of potential attacks have been foiled, and we need to give them our full support. It's worth remembering that the former head of MI6, SIS, John Soares, and the head of MI5, John Evans, warned before these outrages the risk, if we left Europe, of the breakup of the sharing of intelligence with other European countries, because this is not just a British phenomenon.
OK, Peter Whittle now looks quite furious.
So we have to have that degree of cooperation.
You know full well that that kind of intelligence is always shared as a matter of course anyway. It's nothing to do with Brexit. I think to add Brexit into this is really distasteful.
Well, I brought it in because the two retiring heads, and they were there when I was a member of the Cabinet, quite went out of their way to warn. And we should be listening to this.
This is outrageous.
Sean Berry.
The question was, you know, how do we stop people feeling scared of more attacks coming? And when you see things like what happened in Manchester, when you hear about what happened in Westminster, all of us travelling on the tube every day, it is really hard not to feel scared. We need to make sure people feel reassured that everything is being done. And what I think is that the police need more resources, but it's really important where those resources go. Police have been warning about cutbacks to community policing. They say specifically that the best intelligence comes from communities, not from things like blanket surveillance, but from police firmly rooted in communities who can be called upon when people seem to be starting to go wrong. And the prevent strategy doesn't currently do that.
Let's bring Kazim back, because you asked...
Doesn't give resources to the police.
OK, Kazim, you asked the question. Do you find any of this convincing?
I would just like to talk about police numbers for a second. I mean, I'm no expert on this. It's not my field of work. But the 2 police constables or commissioners came out after the wake of the Manchester attack and said that this was not responsible due to a lack of resources. So I think it's incorrect to push a political message over the misery of other people. I don't think that's correct.
There are 32,000 police officers in London, and down from a high in 2010 of about 33,000.
But the numbers doing community policing, they have dropped. We've seen cutbacks from where we used to have 3 officers and 3 PCSOs in every single council ward. Up until recently, the mayor's now doubled it, but we only had 1. And I'm a local councillor, and I know the lack of contact there was. The police officer that we had was changing every 6 months.
Gavin Barwell, can you answer this?
The police numbers in London have held up, and over the course of 2015 to 2020, the comprehensive spending review protects police funding. Actually, Labour's position in the run-up to that spending review, Andy Burnham was arguing for a 10% reduction in the police budget. So it is very important that we retain police resources.
You need more than that. You need 20.
Into our security services.
We have budgeted for 20,000 policemen. You might like to write these figures down, Diane. That will cost about 1.3 billion, which we've costed. Right, but it's not just about that. It's about 23,000 jihadists now in Britain who've either been under surveillance now or in the past. What has to happen is people are amazed that, for example, the attacker in Manchester can go out of the country and then come back in and have an attack. There is obviously a lack of will. We've got to have a proper border force. We would have 4,000 more people in the border force.
I don't know whether it's 23,000, but there's certainly talks of 500 active investigations, 6,000 people who should be on a list. What do you think, Madam, about how you deal with those people?
I mean, I want to know when we're going to stop selling arms to Saudi Arabia and stop exporting Wahhabi terrorism all around the world. I think that's our biggest issue here. I mean, President Trump is curtsying to the Saudis and making an absolute fool of himself, and we're America's biggest allies. They're laughing at us.
OK. This gentleman here with the beard, just in the second row back. You say what you think should be done. Remember, we're talking about wider measures to stop terrorism that go beyond police numbers, which you discussed.
Well, I mean, going beyond police numbers, I mean, the point is about this bomber, he was a Libyan. I'm of Libyan heritage as well. And I can tell you that a real problem is to do with foreign policy. Libya in 2011, when essentially there was a bombing campaign to get rid of Gaddafi. What happened was it was great in one sense, Gaddafi is removed, but then it left a chaotic country, and then you had thereafter basically ISIS growing up, certain kinds of jihadi groups. Basically the whole country was left in tatters, and that was due to the Conservative Party.
Well,
the Conservative government was the one that left this mess.
Gavin Barwell, does your party accept that some of the things that were done, the bombing campaign in Libya, for example, may be in the background, may be to blame?
So I think that these foreign policy questions do pose real difficulties, because we intervened in Libya because Gaddafi was about to murder thousands of innocent civilians. And I think the same issue we have in Syria now. We see what the Assad regime is doing, and we've stood by and allowed it to happen.
Let him answer.
But there is a real challenge about what you then do to reconstruct afterwards, and I would absolutely accept the point the gentleman is making, that we've not done a good job on that.
Jeremy Corbyn was making this point the other day, and...
What Jeremy Corbyn didn't acknowledge is that if you take Afghanistan, if we'd not intervened at all there, we would have allowed a terrorist organisation free space. And
Diane
we
Abbott.
do that.
First of all, let me say, the way that you don't make people feel safer is by stigmatising entire communities. That is not the way. On the question of the relationship between some of our international interventions, like Iraq, like Afghanistan, like Libya, and the terror we see on our streets. Of course, the people responsible for the terrorism are murderous, violent jihadists. But there is no question that the war in Iraq, the intervention in Libya, left that region a more unstable place and literally left failed states in which jihadis can organise. And I'm not saying this. Eliza Manning and Buller, the former head of MI5, said...
But it was Labour who went to war, wasn't it?
Well, I didn't vote for it, as you may know.
You have consistently given succour to terrorists. The fact is that with this, can you tell me, in Sweden there was a terrible attack recently. What was it about Swedish foreign policy that brought that attack on?
Let me bring in Vince Cable.
You are doing their job for them.
Vince Cable.
There is a massive difference between looking for explanations, and foreign policy may be part of that, and providing excuses and justification. And there is absolutely no justification and excuse for resort to terrorism against innocent civilians, whatever the underlying cause of the instability. The distinction must be made absolutely clear.
OK, so you don't think about the wars in the background here? That's not the issue?
Well, indeed.
It's just a policing
voted
matter.
against the Iraq war, and one of the reasons I did so was because of the warnings we were given was that it would stir up instability and promote terrorism. People like Boris Johnson have acknowledged that publicly.
Sian Berry, to what extent do you say it wasn't just that person, it was something else going on behind them?
I mean, I think we're fighting something that's really terrifying. It's like a fire, so we have to be removing the fuel from the fire. And I think, you know, there's no question that, you know, the flames, that we need to be investigating and condemning the people who do the crimes. But the region is a mess, and we have to take our responsibility for the mess that we cause. You know, like Jeremy Corbyn, like Vince, it was on Stop the War marches, and it's one of the key things that we put into all our leaflets right back in 2003. If you do this, you'll create instability in the region, it'll create room for jihadists, and that's what's happened.
But I have to... Look, when you talk about this, it is actually excusing them in a way, even though it's done very nicely. These jihadists, right, and people in ISIS, what they do, they throw guys like me, gay guys like me, off of buildings. What's that got to do with foreign policy? What has it got to do with the way that they treat women? Nothing.